we're seeing names now pop up again, right? Where it's like Profar and Scherzer and Pete Alonso, and they're not going to get all these guys. We know that. They're not going to hit on every single one of them. But if you're just looking at the Jack Flaherty stuff and the way the market has been, and the fact that some of these guys are going to the Dodgers because there isn't seemingly a lot of money out there, like what's your read on the market right now? Because I want to get into the Santander thing, but like part of I think the contract that wasn't discussed is people kept making this joke like, why aren't teams releasing, or why aren't insiders releasing who the runner-up is now? And I'm going, because I'm not really sure how many runners-up there were. I'm not really sure how many teams at the end of the day were coming to Santander and offering him this kind of money. Like, it kind of seems, again, from an outsider's perspective and from someone who's kind of doing a little bit of texting and asking around, that it's not exactly tons of bidding wars out there, that there's a couple teams that are eyeing these remaining players, but yeah, there's not a ton of money left.
Yeah, and I think to answer the Santander runner-up thing, I would look at the Tigers and Angels there. So there's always a runner-up, and
sure.
This time it wasn't the Jays, but and like you said, they have the potential to do more here. And when you think about their best moves in free agency, some of them, like the Marcus Semien deal, came at a time that other teams weren't spending. Even Robbie Ray that offseason, that was COVID. That was the time that other teams weren't spending. The Blue Jays, to their credit, really never stopped spending. Even when the team was not playing in Toronto, they were not selling tickets, right? Their revenue obviously took a hit. They kept spending. And that was a contrast to other teams that allowed them to do some pretty good work. So now they're in a similar situation. They can continue to spend and continue to consider additions. I don't want to put them on a pedestal for doing that. I think that that's what teams should be doing. To Jack Flaherty's point, this is pro sports. You should be trying to win. The Mariners should be signing Pete Alonso right now. The Cincinnati Reds should go out and sign Jack Flaherty. Like, there are a lot of things that should happen. But the Jays are in that mix, and they're able to keep adding, which makes things interesting. I think they still face an uphill battle. They're still not in the position they should be. They still have work to do, but things are getting more interesting with the Jays.
Yeah, listen, the Anthony Santander signing didn't paper over all the issues that this team has, right? Like, it hasn't. It's a nice signing, and I do have some more questions for you about it. But yeah, I think that the prevailing sentiment here right now is that the team needs to remain aggressive, and that if they could land one more of these guys, particularly the bat, right? Like, I don't know how you feel about the starting pitching market and whether the Blue Jays are like actually super involved in those guys, and what your read is on the Scherzer thing. But with Profar and Alonso still there and their name being linked to them, I guess how much of that do you think is posturing, again, by agents who are leaking things and using the Blue Jays and the pressure that is on the organization versus actual reality that this team would be looking at that second threshold of the competitive balance tax and saying, okay, you know what, we might actually be willing to go into this if the right opportunity presents itself, like it did with Santander?
Yeah, the Blue Jays are right now over the second CBT threshold of 261. They might go over the third. It's not impossible that they would go over the third. And this is a departure from what happened before in previous seasons. When you listen back to Mark Shapiro and what he said about expected payroll for 2025, when this offseason was starting, he said it was probably going to be in the same area as what it was last year when they spent 240. Now they're at 260. So this is things are going up. Now that's a good thing. That's arguably the thing the Blue Jays are doing best right now, is being willing to spend, because they probably have a top 5, top 6, top 7 payroll. That's where you want to be. So you can't, payroll wise, they certainly have some resources at their disposal, but there are other questions. It doesn't paper over, to your point, it doesn't paper over the roster as a whole, because they still need just more of everything. They could use more offense. I think their offense right now is probably like solid to a bit above average when you look at the totality of their offensive talent right now. A chance for more upside, but this is not a juggernaut. This is not the Dodgers or the Diamondbacks or the Phillies. There's room to improve there. And then pitching, man, we can get into these details as you want to, but they need pitching, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't think anybody disagrees with that, especially when you look at what their projections are for their starting pitching. And that's not infallible, right? It's been wrong before. But, these are a lot of older guys, and even some of the guys that aren't older, like the Bowden Francis of the world, are not, guarantees that they're going to be what they were last season. But yeah, like I want to stick with just the idea of the money, first of all, because they deferred it. Atkins says that the Miles Straw is going to have zero impact, only positive impact from Miles Straw. That's the only plausible outcome from Miles Straw, is that it's positive, positive, positive. But what do you think something changed here? Like, I'm reluctant to believe things like this, but obviously they wanted to improve the ball club, and so signing Santander and knowing that they were in on him for a long time is not like a far departure from this. We didn't expect them, I don't think anyways, to just be completely changing the approach when it comes to payroll, but all of a sudden it sounds like there's at least, you talked about this months ago, the idea that they could have an accelerated plan for Vladimir Guerrero Jr., and you see guys like Carlos Baerga, who has missed in the past, I think is fair to say, put out there that the Blue Jays are going to be willing to increase their offer and that they are a little bit more aggressive in trying to get things done, that ownership wants things done with Vladimir Guerrero Jr. If they are eyeing another one of these second pieces, especially like the Profars and the Alonsos of the world, like that's going to come with a pretty significant price tag. Do you think that the actual pressure and the narratives around this team and some of the failings that have happened in terms of trying to acquire some of these free agents, like more specifically, I think the Corbin Burnses than, say, the Juan Sotos. But do you think that any of this public perception has actually put pressure on them to change what they originally thought payroll was going to be?
I don't know internally what those discussions were, as far as, did the public pressure get to anyone? I don't know. I can say that historically, Mark Shapiro has probably been someone who's less prone to feeling the influence of pressure from the public than others. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, we can debate, some other time. But I don't think that he's someone who's super reactive to public pressure. So my guess is that, not necessarily, but there are a lot of forces involved here, right? There's the ownership level force. There's maybe Shapiro did have a change of heart. I'm not sure. But, I think that, this is something that they've never been held to like a hard dollar limit. And there's always been flexibility depending on who's out there to push a little further. And right now we're seeing them push, and I'm not hearing complaints on the part of fans because the roster certainly needs the help.
Yeah, there's no complaints about the push from people right now. The way that I was looking at this was, all right, maybe they're going to sign one big guy and they were going to try to be a little bit more economical in terms of some of the others. But if they're linked to these guys, that would be a bit of a departure from that. And so I guess that's the follow-up is, how real do you think their pursuit of guys like Alonso? Let's start with the bats. How real do you think they are in Alonso and Profar?
I think it's real. I think that Alonso, at this point, if he's not going to the Mets, which that seems like that's not nearly as likely to happen. Maybe a small chance he goes back there. But he might want to deal with opt-outs. He might want to deal where you kind of have a Bellinger situation from last year, a Matt Chapman situation from last year where the player gets some flexibility. So if the Blue Jays are willing to do that, which I think they definitely should be, then you have a chance to acquire someone who's really been one of the premier power hitters in baseball. And my sense is that there is real interest there, and not only interest on the Jays' part, but I do think that based on the read that I have on this situation, that Alonso would probably be open to coming here. Like I think he is open to coming here. So, that's a real possibility for the Jays, who also, according to Mark Feinsand, and certainly this lines up with what I've heard, continue to show some interest in Jurickson Profar as well. So Profar is interesting because then you have kind of three corner outfielders. You rotate them through those corner spots in the DH spot with Springer and Santander, and you kind of make it work. So, in some ways, that's actually a simpler positional fit than you get with someone like Pete Alonso, who would have to share time at first with Vladdy.
Huh. So I guess to even kind of cut it even further down, do you expect them to get one of those two guys?
I would not say that I expect them to get one of those guys. I think that you're going to hear them linked to Pete Alonso.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't think that those rumors are going to stop until Pete Alonso signs. Again, because there seems to be some real, beginnings of mutual interest there. But the reason I say that I don't expect them to land one of those guys is because they are simultaneously dealing with a need on the pitching side.
Yeah.
And I would say that their need on the pitching side is greater right now. And when I asked Ross Atkins about this yesterday, he did point out the idea of opportunity cost, meaning if they spend on one of these areas, it might be harder to spend on the other.
Okay, so with the pitching side, is Scherzer the top remaining target for them, or are you keeping your eyes somewhere else?
My belief is that Scherzer's their top remaining target. And there are other guys out there, whether it's Nick Pivetta, whether it is a Jack Flaherty. My understanding is that the Blue Jays do have some level of interest in both of those guys, as well as Scherzer. Jose Quintana is someone that they've been linked to before. So that's 4 starting pitchers, and the starting pitching market has really thinned out in the last little while. But there is a strong case to be made for adding a starting pitcher to this group. And then you have Yariel Rodriguez as a multi-inning reliever. Maybe he's a spot starter. You probably want to be able to go 6 at some points in the season, right? Maybe in April before things are totally, before guys are totally in their rhythm. The other thing is, if you do end up with one of these veteran pitchers, especially if they end up with Scherzer, then you've got a pretty veteran rotation. And I don't think you want to be pushing those guys too hard. So that's where going 6-man is actually a pretty good idea. So I think starting pitching is the place that they should be most aggressive. I think the Jays are making another addition. I don't know what position that's going to address, but I do think that there's going to be another ad here of some form. And I believe that Scherzer on the pitching market is probably their top guy. But the thing is, Scherzer at this point in his career, he wants to win. So the more you can add to your team first, then you go to Max Scherzer and you say, guys, we are ready to roll here. We have a really, really good team. We just need you as the finishing piece. I think that's the way you get it done. So, could that be Profar first and you try to do both? I don't know. But I think that there are some, you have to pitch Scherzer on a contender at this point in his career. He doesn't want to pitch for the White Sox.
Well, you do also have to pitch him on money, though, too, right? And if you're trying to make the case for the Blue Jays, like the recent history does suggest that it's not just the money, it's that you add a little bit of term. Is that the path for him? Like outside of convincing him that you're competitive, yes, that you have an opportunity to win. But also, if he does sign with the Blue Jays, does that come with the idea of potentially more term for an older guy?
I think coming off a year where he started 9 games, I think it's a 1-year deal.
Okay.
And I look at Scherzer compared to Charlie Morton and Justin Verlander, also in their 40s. Both of those guys signed a 1-year, $15 million deal. Now, we all know Scherzer and Verlander go way back to the Tigers, to the Mets. They've got something of a, I don't want to say rivalry, but they've been linked throughout their career. Sure. And Verlander gets 15. I think if you're the Blue Jays and you want to be serious about signing Max Scherzer, you're offering 16 at least, right? You got to go above Verlander. So I don't know exactly what that number is. Maybe it's higher. Maybe it's 20, to get Scherzer to come to Toronto. Maybe it's something like that. I don't think it would be a 2-year deal, but I think if you want to get his attention, building a winner and offering north of Verlander would probably be good steps.
What's the backup plan to him then?
It might be something like Pivetta, and I mean, Pivetta is a pretty appealing pitcher, I think. But he's looking at a 3-year deal, I would think. When you look at Kikuchi, when you look at Severino, he kind of fits in that group. So if Pivetta's, and those guys were $60, $70 million. So that's a bigger expenditure. You're taking on a bit more term, a bit more risk. You're also getting a younger pitcher who's 30, 31 years old. So I see a real path to pursuing someone like Pivetta, but then again, so many teams could use him. Like 28 teams in baseball could really, anyone not named the Dodgers basically could really use Nick Pivetta right now.
There's reality versus some teams maybe tightening their purses, maybe some of these free agents still waiting, some guys potentially settling for better winners. Like, who are the other teams then right now? Because it seems like you just mentioned the Tigers. Like, they're still waiting around. They're obviously one of the teams that's been pursuing Bregman for this entire offseason. So they seem to be looming. I'm not really sure how much of the Angels thing was about Santander specifically, or whether or not they're still looking to spend, given just like where their roster's at and what they're up against in terms of everything. But yeah, who are the other teams that you're viewing right now that are actually going to be competing with the Blue Jays in terms of those parameters, that willingness to spend?
Yeah, and this is where the Blue Jays have to read this market really well because arguably they did do a good job by reading the Santander situation and getting him for, essentially a CBT hit of $70 million
Yeah.
over 5 years. So their patience paid off there. And there is a chance here that their patience could pay off again. And look, maybe the Blue Jays think they can get Scherzer for less, right? Like
Mm.
maybe they get him for 10. I don't know. Like if you're patient enough, at a certain point, he does have to take a deal. So, this is where you get into that sort of waiting game because a team like the Mariners, for example, they should be signing Pete Alonso right now. Like
Mm.
that's what they should be doing, but they're not going to do it. So, same with the Giants. Like, are the Giants going to do it? They probably should be in on Pete Alonso too. Um, the Jays need to have a read on who's likely to jump into that market and who's not going to, especially the Mets because they're front and center in this entire thing. The Tigers are probably a team that could use a starting pitcher as well. So despite the fact that they have some candidates, they don't have a lot of certainty behind Tarek Skubal. So I think that there are, the Cubs are a team that's lurking where you have Bregman, who's been linked to them as a possibility. Red Sox are seemingly in on Bregman. And Alex Cora seems to want him as the team's second baseman. So there are various teams out there that are still, whether it's spending a bit more aggressively, whether it's lurking, this free agent period is far from over.
You know what the good news is? I don't know how many more players the Dodgers can roster, period.
Yeah.
Like at this point, you've already got the best starting pitching in baseball. You've got the deepest bullpen in baseball. Like they've got multiple closers. Yeah, their lineup looks set. I just can't envision them being in anybody else. Like this now comes down to those remaining teams, which I would think like when you're outlining those groups that kind of like when you're talking about those teams in particular, I have a hard time separating them from the Blue Jays in terms of their chances to win. Even the Tigers with Skubal and the fact that they went to the postseason last year.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. And, the Jays, maybe they paid an extra tax for Santander by taking on an extra year.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe they took on a little extra risk to sign Jeff Hoffman. So, I can see that being the case, that Toronto is not going to be up there with New York and Los Angeles when it comes to recruiting players, especially when the team is just not viewed as a contender in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that Santander helps for a couple of reasons. One, because it kind of eases some of that tension and pressure of will the Blue Jays get anyone? And probably more importantly, it just makes them a better team. And when I look at this roster right now, I see a team that's probably a solid baseball team.
Mm-hmm.
And, could they, if a few things go right, contend? Absolutely. Could they, if a few things go wrong, not contend?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, yes. So this is where, and I was talking to someone with a different team about this just the other day, but this is where if you're the Blue Jays right now and you project, let's say for argument's sake, for 82 or 83 wins, this is where you actually have to keep adding because you need to get to the point that you see yourself as an 85, 86, 87 win team,
Mm-hmm.
because at that point you have a legit shot for the playoffs. You don't want to sign Santander and Jeff Hoffman only to miss the playoffs by one game. That is not an acceptable outcome. The Blue Jays,
Mm-hmm.
the way they're directing themselves and the way that they've put all of this, all of these resources into this season, including potentially the last year of Vlad, the last year of Bo, you got to win. You can't just get in, contention in September. Not good enough. So they need to push right now and then set themselves up to continue pushing at the deadline and adding further in July.
Yeah, I was talking to Ennis about this last week. Actually, it was earlier this week in terms of trying to outline what the acceptable bar is for people. Well, the thing is like, yeah, making a wild card is not good enough. Like you either run away with the division and you win a ton of games and go way over expectation, which at this point doesn't feel realistic, or you go on a real run. Like you gotta make noise in the playoffs for the noise in the city to quiet down. And so, yeah, that's not gonna. I think without miracles happening, that's not going to happen without more additions. And so part of this, though, is because we have mentioned the money, and even though they do the deferrals with Santander and go on down the line of maybe they are willing to go up into an extra tax and payroll going up, blah, 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 blah. is the idea that they would still have to remove some of this money in order to make some of these other guys work. And there's been a little bit of buzz about Springer more than this offseason, but like going back, I think at least last year, I think Blair even mentioned it. They had looked around and seen, hey, what could possibly happen here? Are there guys on this team right now that you think the Blue Jays are trying to move off of, or would certainly be willing to move off of to try to make some of the other money work and bring some of these other guys in?
So my understanding is that the Blue Jays can keep adding, and they don't have to shed payroll in corresponding moves. So let's say, for example, they are able to get something done with Scherzer. That wouldn't mean that they go and have to trade, a corresponding player off the roster. So that's gives them flexibility. Now they can trade players off the roster, and certainly if you were to add an outfielder, that would open up possibilities because they already have a lot of outfielders kind of percolating. So I don't know that they feel that they need to ditch anybody. I don't think that, to answer your question, I don't think they're trying to trade anyone off of this roster. But if they had signed Tanner Scott, for example, who they showed some interest in, before he signed with the Dodgers for $72 million. So hypothetically, if they had landed him, would that have potentially opened up the door to trade an Eric Swanson or a Zach Pop? I mean, maybe they would. If they were to go out and sign, a Pete Alonso, does that give them enough confidence in their overall offense that they would think about trading, from their, Joey Loperfido? Does that trade Will Wagner somewhere and they try to get pitching in a trade? Because Alonso's taking a lot of DH at bats and Wagner's not going to play second base, but he does have trade value. Maybe you flip him to the Mariners for relievers. That's the sort of thing that you can do, but I don't think they're trying to trade Will Wagner.
Yeah, which would make sense. Yeah, I'm not really thinking about the Will Wagners of the world. I'm thinking more of the older guys that, like the George Springers, where it's a ton of money that you could get off of, maybe even eat some of it, but it really does make a meaningful dent in terms of where you're going with your payroll. Because, the idea of them signing an Alonso or bringing in a Scherzer on a one-year deal or remaining this aggressive is just like, damn, you're looking at something that's entirely different than we've ever seen, right? And so, it remains a curiosity to me, just like the level of comfort that they're going to have. And maybe part of that has to do with the fact that there's not a crazy amount of money on the books moving forward and they can get out from some of these deals pretty rapidly. But I guess I wasn't expecting it to be quite like this, or potentially quite like this, when a lot of the discussion was, hey, the payroll is the payroll. You're not going to see marketable changes from that. You're not going to see a huge departure from where they've been in the past. Okay, so part of this, though, too, is the deferred money thing, right? Like, if Santander signs that deal and there's no deferred money, people are looking at it differently. And I don't know how much of this is actually relevant. I'm so in baseball talk, right? Even with my social media, I don't have a great connection with a lot of just non-hyper aware baseball fans, right? I'm guessing that when you're at the Rogers Center next year and it's say full for the home opener, that it's going to be a pretty minute percentage that's aware of the deferrals with Santander, right? I think that my echo chamber is probably telling me a bit of something that isn't really coming back this way. But it is important, right? There's a reason why it's being raised, and there's a reason why more people are aware of it. Started with the Dodgers. I was actually kind of complaining about it because, to me, I'm fine with what the Dodgers are doing. I like having a hateable team. I like having a Death Star that everyone roots against. I was talking to a friend on the phone the other day going, I have no doubts in my mind right now, based on who the Dodgers are, that if they face the Yankees, who I grew up hating like no other, in a World Series, I would be rooting for the Yankees. I don't even have a shadow of a doubt in terms of where I would be on that now. I used to, it was last year, I'm not sure. Now, 100% rooting against the Dodgers. They are the evil emperor. I don't care that they're in the National League. I don't care that I have this history with the Yankees. Root against them like I did with the Golden State Warriors. So, I guess, where I'm going with this is this going to be more pervasive throughout baseball now? Is this the new normal that a lot of teams are going to be able to defer money and that this isn't just a Dodgers issue?
Yeah, I think it's available to anyone, and it's a good strategy. I mean, the Nationals have done that. Speaking of Scherzer, they did that with his deal going back years. So I think it's a strategy that any team can use, and I think it's a pretty good one. I definitely agree with your point that your standard Jays fan isn't worried about it. Like for me, if I go to a Leafs game, I have no idea, JD, like what William Nylander's contract status
You're
is.
like
I don't
literally the
know.
only guy in the entire city that is not aware of that, but congrats.
I honestly don't know, and I don't even care. Like, it doesn't matter to me. I just want to see him get a breakaway, score a couple goals. That's it. Like, I don't care.
God, I'm so envious of that. Like, that actually sent like a tinge of jealousy down my spine that I can't even properly express.
Same with Matthews. Matthews, I'm like, I think in my mind, he's just a Leaf forever.
Could you
don't
guess?
Even tell me,
Could you just quickly guess what those guys? Yeah, like
I'm guessing. I actually think I remember some Nylander contract stuff from a couple years ago. So I think Nylander's got an AAV of 7 for the next 6 years.
No.
And I think better or
that
worse?
That was his first contract extension. Yeah, now he makes $11 million a year.
Okay, whatever. Yeah. I'm fine with that. Matthews, in my mind, Matthews is a Leaf for life. Yeah. Matthews is making 11 on a 10-year deal.
No. No, he's on a 4-year deal at 13 some per. But
no, so he could leave?
Oh, yeah, he could leave.
We don't
he could absolutely leave, buddy.
Don't like that at all.
No, his whole thing was that he's like a bet on himself guy where he takes the short-term deals. I love this, though, because this is actually the way I think a fan is supposed to be, where you don't care what the actual contracts are, right? Like some people are. Some people are GM mode when they want to play video games and they're interested in setting the concession prices. And most people just want to play the video game against a friend, right? Like most people just want to go, I want to beat you at this game. And so I don't tell people how to fan. I'm the type of fan who cares about the contracts and about, what the future of the team is going to be and the ins and out of everything. But I am envious of people who just get to kind of like enjoy it from, hey, I'm showing up at this game and I just want to see the goals and I just want to see the home runs. And but like the point to this in terms of deferred money is, it does allow you seemingly to open up for more players, for getting the guys that when you show up, you're like, oh, cool, Pete Alonso is on this team. Oh, cool, Anthony Santander is on this team. And I know that you mentioned that this has been done before with other guys. This wasn't just like a Dodgers precedent-breaking thing, but we had never seen it quite to the degree of the Dodgers. We obviously didn't see it to the degree of Shohei Ohtani. And I'm kind of curious how agents and players are feeling about this, whether they're just like, fine, they're okay with it, like deferred money, whatever, it's going to be workable. But if this kind of feels like a bit of a win for baseball owners.
I think owners like it, or they wouldn't keep doing it. I think at the same time, Anthony Santander, to pick the most recent example, this did come up at his availability yesterday, and he said that he was fine with it, and he wanted to do something that would help the Blue Jays win more games. So there is, I guess, that benefit to it for the players where if your team is doing this systematically, you might actually end up on a better roster. And so, it's certainly a sign that you're spending in free agency. And I totally agree with you, by the way, on the Dodgers, where they are the villains. I think that that's abundantly clear, despite the fact that they have some extremely likable individuals. Sure. Put them as a collective, they are the villains of baseball. But the difference between them and the Golden State Warriors is, the Warriors won 4 times, whereas the Dodgers, they've won, they won in 2020, partial season. They won again this past season in 2024, but there's no back-to-back. They've only won 2 total. Mm-hmm. Maybe this discussion changes if in a year's time they win again.
Yeah, that does.
I think, and that would be fair. But I just keep saying, like, I will not be surprised if the Cubs sweep the Dodgers in the division series next year, and it's Justin Steele, who outduels Tyler Glasnow. This stuff happens all the time. Like so that's where I'm like, we can't worry about it yet. It hasn't happened yet.
Yeah. Do you think that the actual, like, just to kind of stick with the Dodgers thing for a second, because we're talking about it, do you think that this actually has potential ripple effects for next CBA in terms of what ends up happening here? Because I'm very anti-salary cap. I don't want to see it ever in baseball. I hate it in the sports that I watch. Like, man, the NBA added this competitive luxury tax, like the same thing with CBT, but it's so punitive and it limits trades to a degree where yesterday I'm paying attention to like the Phoenix Suns trading for or a future 2031 pick to acquire crappy picks now and hoping that they can shop a player around, basically spreading money around 4 teams to acquire Jimmy Butler, and you're like, God, this has really killed some of the transactions in the sport. It's awful. Like, it's just bad. NFL has non-guaranteed contracts, so it doesn't count. These other sports aren't going to get that. But if the Dodgers do start to rip off these wins and their payroll does remain in this spot and they keep deferring these contracts in such a ridiculous way, and again, like, I'm with you on the Justin Steele thing, and like, anything can happen in baseball, short series. How many times have they seen the teams with the highest payrolls lose? Like, look at all the Yankees examples throughout the recent vintage too, like Red Sox, whatever. But yeah, does this one feel a little different in terms of the tone of the league and what owners might want to do going into the next, collective bargaining agreement?
Well, I can tell you without a doubt that this will be part of the discussions leading up to the CBA, without a doubt, because there are two lines here. One is owner versus owner, because you have the Mets and the Dodgers who are comfortable spending to these really high levels, and you have other teams, whether it be the Guardians or the Rays or the Pirates, we all know who, the teams that essentially don't spend, and their ownership groups historically have wanted some sort of evening out of resources, and they have wanted ways to even the playing field because it's to their advantage, whereas the Mets and Dodgers are fine the way it is because it's to their advantage. So you have that kind of tension point, and then you also have the fundamental tension point of players versus owners, and players for decades and decades and decades have resisted a salary cap in baseball, and so that will continue to be the case. They will continue to resist the implementation of a hard salary cap in baseball. And I think, based on covering the last couple CBAs very closely, I think it's the kind of issue that players would accept the work stoppage for. We saw it before.
Yeah, of course.
Like, this is something that matters a ton to players. So I don't think you're going to see a hard cap in baseball next CBA. And I understand fans debating it, but it's out of the hands of fans. It is really, it's something that players are going to oppose very strongly.
Yeah, you know what I would say to those owners that are like, we want a flattening and a helping? It's like, yeah, that's what the money's for that you're getting from that tax. Like, you're getting funneled money. I saw something the other day where it's like the Marlins baseball team is essentially free. Like, the other owners are paying for the Marlins to field a team. And I'm like, yeah, if you're a fan, don't be crying for a salary cap. Be crying for your ownership to be doing the same things that these other groups are doing. Like, the Dodgers aren't the only ones owned by billionaires.
Exactly. And Miami is not a small city.
No,
it's not this little like prairie town.
No,
they got some money there.
Yeah, I've been there. I didn't feel like I was in the booties. I wasn't like, what is this place? Are there even any people here? No, there's a lot. And it's just like they get trumpeted as one of the main examples, but like, there's a lot of offenders when it comes to this. And yeah, I guess when it comes to the salary cap thing, you're right about the resistance, and I hope that ends up happening. I shouldn't say my greater fear, but my other fear is like an extended work stoppage that we see, really, really, really extend, because this is such a hardline issue for so many of those owners. Okay, two more things. I've already kept you for a long time, and I'll try to get through these ones quicker. One is just, what is your read right now on the Vladdy situation? Because, seemingly there's been some momentum, and signing a good player is a good indicator for, hey, like, especially going to the second threshold is like a good sign to a player where you say, we're still trying to win. We still want to compete. I do know Vladdy is genuine in his love of Toronto, but yeah, what do you stake the odds at right now that something actually gets done? Where do you think they're at in their negotiations today?
I think the second question's a lot easier. Picking odds, so tough.
I know insiders hate it, and that's why I ask it.
Well, I would answer that on a different question, but on this one, it could go in either direction. Like, it really could. If he doesn't sign an extension by February the 18th, I'm not going to be sitting here like falling out of my chair. If they announce on February the 16th that they've signed Vladdy to a 12-year deal, again, it's not going to be the most shocking thing I hear probably even that day. So, the odds are tough to say. I can say that this has been an ongoing process for the Blue Jays this offseason with Vladimir Guerrero Jr. And the sides have continued to engage periodically. The Blue Jays have publicly said that they're talking to Vlad Jr. and that they want to extend him. Vlad Jr. has publicly said that he is open to an extension, loves the city of Toronto, and he has publicly said that he's, expecting to have further talks. My understanding is that aside from the 1-year deal for to avoid arbitration for 2025, that they haven't necessarily been sitting down at the negotiating table every day. Like I think that it's been sort of, the Jays have been focused on other things. Vladdy's been focused on his preparation for the season, and clearly the Blue Jays need to do a lot of work on this, and they need to push this forward, and they need to make a compelling offer to Vlad Jr. I don't believe that that's been what's happening in the last week, is they've been involved with Roki Sasaki and Santander and all this stuff. So I think that it's going to ramp up in February. I don't think that these talks are I don't think they're exchanging 4 or 5 emails a day on this right now. But they need to do that if they're going to cross that bridge.
Listen, I'll be thrilled if he signs a contract extension. But this is so trending towards I took vacation right when the Kawhi thing was happening. I've had a history of, because some of this stuff happens in the summer, but I've got a trip coming up that week in February when it's basically the deadline. And I've done a million of these negative shows, and I like to be on when the big things happen. And I am predicting that I will be on vacation if Vladimir Guerrero Jr. signs. I would just like to say that to everybody right now, that I'll be somewhere far, far away, not able to comment on any of this. So please follow me on Twitter and Instagram at JD Bunkis so you can get my thoughts on it when it does happen. Last thing, this is a quickie. It's an easy one. Do we know who didn't vote for Ichiro?
No idea.
Come on, who are the streets say it? Because this reeks of some guy, a guy like me, frankly, someone where you're that person has a vote. A market guy from Cincinnati who just is old and is I don't like the idea of guys getting in right away. This is one of, I know this happens all the time where there's just stupid holdouts, but this one is gotta be the number one worst one that I can remember. It's this one and Griffey are the two stupidest that I can ever remember where it wasn't unanimous and it was so obvious and easy to have a slam dunk.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Ichiro is a legend, just absolutely incredible figure in Major League Baseball history and player and dude. So yeah, it's a shame that he didn't get in unanimously and join Mariano Rivera as the only players ever to do that.
Mm-hmm.
He's so clearly deserving of it. And this is where we could have a whole other podcast someday about the Hall of Fame voting process. And it's so clunky, and it really sucks when someone this good, or Griffey or Jeter, when they don't get in unanimously. End of the day, I still think it's awesome that Ichiro's in. And
yeah, of course.
I watched the call this morning of Ken Griffey Jr. phoning Ichiro to tell him he's in. It's so cool. But yeah, there's no excuse. How can, if he's not a Hall of Famer, why do you, he's the definition of a Hall of Famer.
So this is the thing is, it doesn't matter ultimately. He is in the Hall of Fame. I do think that, though, we remember this stuff. Every year we flash up the percentages of guys getting in. And so to be 100%, actually, it doesn't mean everything. It doesn't take away anything, but it would have been a little additive. And I would say I'd like to introduce a rule for the Baseball Writers of America, of which you are a part of, is if there's ever a time where someone has a 98% or above, right? Or 97, whatever we want to set the high percentage of. If there's ever situations where it's that high, the guys who didn't vote for him should be out. You lose your vote. If you vote against a guy with that threshold, then it's clear that you're not able to do the job properly without some sort of bias. You're out. You lose the vote.
Well, yeah, I'm fine. Sure. I'd be open to something like that.
Yeah, 95%. What are you doing? You're dissenting just to dissent. You're Ennis.
And here's what I would say as a starting point that we probably actually could, have some momentum toward, is just make everyone's vote public, because this individual is not known. And I think that if you're going to do that, there should be an accountability. And this is where, I'm not a voter yet for the Hall of Fame. I will be starting next year, I believe. And at that point, better believe I'll make my ballot public, and you can roast me for whatever you want.
Yeah,
you can, man. Go for it.
Yeah,
and so can anyone. I think that's it's a privilege to be able to vote for all these voters, and it should be something hard earned and considered very carefully. And if you don't put someone on your ballot, you should have to explain why, and you should have to face the public.
You just gave me PTSD of reminding, like, when Shai told me why he didn't vote for Edgar, and I just lost it. Like, I was like saying there, like almost half a play. He's like, well, he was older and still good, and so maybe I was like, what? I could barely handle it as a very devout Edgar Martinez supporter who, was integral in my childhood. All right, I can't wait for that. I can't wait to see your ballot and then yell at you too if you don't vote for Edwin. It's like you're going to feel the pressure next year to vote for Edwin Encarnacion. Benny, thanks as always for the time. Lots of great stuff today. Thanks for doing it.
Yeah, anytime, JD.
See you, pal.